Hello, I'm Novelet Witt, and welcome to Morgen Talk. My guest today is Dr. Gary Griggs, who is a distinguished professor of Earth and Planetary Sciences at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Hello, Professor Gary.
How are you?
How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Sure. My pleasure.
Excellent. So tell me, what is climate change?
So I think we know what climate is.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, people have said, what's the difference between weather and climate? And climate is what you predict and weather is what you get.
Mm-hmm.
So weather is short term. What's going to be today, tomorrow, next week? And we're pretty good at that. Climate is long term. So climate change is when really the entire temperature climate of the globe, the Earth, can change. And that happens both over geologic time periods, over tens of thousands of years, and now humans are affecting that over much shorter time frames. And climate is really driven by how much heat we get from the sun. And the distance between the Earth and the sun changes over time due to some natural cycles. Turns out the Earth has a wobble on its axis that takes us further away. It has a tilt, and our orbit around the sun is not a circle, it's an ellipse. So we've known it for several centuries that the Earth changes temperature and climate naturally. So that affects everything. We may not think because it's a little bit warmer or a little cooler that has a big impact on us, but in fact, virtually everything on the Earth's surface is interconnected with temperature and climate.
Okay. All right. So how is that really affecting the wildfires we're having in California? And if sea levels rising, well, I can move more inland, or maybe move to one of those Midwest states. Why do I need to worry so much about that?
Well, first, I think everybody wants to live on the California coast, right?
Right.
And there's good reasons for that. The weather's more temperate, all kinds of reasons. But it isn't just that it's getting a few degrees warmer outside, but climate change affects water. It affects how much, in fact, precipitation in the mountains falls as snow versus rain. And as it gets warmer, there's going to be less snowfall, less snowpack that produces a third of California's water. About a third comes from groundwater and a third comes from rivers. So the warmer it gets, the more rainfall in the winter months, the more rapid it'll run off, the less we can store. So it turns out our water tables are dropping, and we have a drought, looks like, coming up this year. It means the forests get drier. We have more frequent droughts. And what that's meant in California in recent years is these massive fires, the biggest fires we've ever had in California history. So even people living in the Sierras or inland counties are feeling the effect of that extra heat. In addition, first, it's all being driven by more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as we burn more coal and oil and gas, which still provide about 85 to 90% of our energy. We keep building up this blanket of carbon dioxide, and all carbon dioxide molecules trap heat. They're not Republican or Democrat. They're chemistry. So the warmer it gets, the warmer the air gets, the warmer the ocean gets. What happens is as water warms, just like in your water heater, it expands. So sea levels rise because the water's getting warmer, but also ice is melting, both in Antarctica and Greenland, and in places like the Alps and the Andes and the Himalayas. So we have the equivalent of about 216 feet, of total sea level rise if all the ice on the planet melted. That takes care of all of Southern California. It takes care of most of the world's big cities. That's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year or next century, but even a few feet make a big difference. And I give you just two examples. At 2 feet of sea level rise, which could happen in the next 30 years, all of Balboa Island goes underwater. The whole island goes underwater. Most of Newport Beach, much of the Long Beach Peninsula and Naples and Belmont shores. So we have a lot of building right on the coast. It's very low. But what surprises some people is, at least in the northern part of the state, is that Sacramento, our capital, and Stockton are both ocean ports. We have ships coming in 100 miles from the coast, and we're still at sea level. So that water can penetrate a considerable distance inland. So you may say, well, I'm going to move to Sacramento, or I'm going to move someplace else. But first, it's going to get hotter. We're going to have more heat waves, more droughts. We're going to have less water available. We're probably going to have more frequent fires, which we've been experiencing. In the east, we're having more frequent and more severe hurricanes, because hurricanes are driven by warm ocean water evaporating. So, and those are just things that affect people, but we also know crops need water. Our California provides so much of the nation's produce, and the last drought, hundreds of thousands of acres could not be irrigated because we didn't have enough water. So we have reached a point where all these impacts are catching up with us, and our population continues to increase. Everybody wants to eat. Everybody wants water. So it's a bigger issue than just getting a few degrees warmer. And I think it's fair to say it's going to be really hard to escape this no matter where you go. You can move further north, move to Alaska, move to Washington, move to Canada, but there's reasons why people don't live there now, you know?
Right. Oh, that's a bit daunting,
It's
to say the
daunting.
least. So then, I mean, at this rate, what can we do really? You know, and most of these things, it gets worse, I suppose, beyond our lifetime as well. So it's like there's a time issue, and then there is feeling helpless, as in what can we really do, and where do we start?
Well, I give a fair number of talks on these topics, and one of the things I tell people, because that question often gets asked, well, what can I do? And I'll say there's one thing every person over 18 years old can do: vote. And that is a powerful, simple, cheap thing to do right now more than ever. This division between political parties and what they believe or don't believe. When we have the President of the United States doesn't believe in climate change, somebody coming up for the Supreme Court who isn't sure, we have a problem. So without getting into politics, you know, we don't get to vote on climate change. We don't get to vote on sea level rise. It's true. A couple of science communicators once said, the wonderful thing about science is it's true whether or not you believe it. And I think for some people that might believe it, but it's just too hard to accept what's happening. So I think there's also a lot of personal choices, and changing your light bulbs, you know, putting in solar panels isn't in and of itself going to change the climate. But if everybody did that, it would have a huge impact. And one of the things about California, because we are the nation's, I shouldn't say the nation's, we are the world's 5th largest economy. So people look and watch what we do. Other states watch what we do. Our automobile emission standards, we're the leader in the country now in solar energy. We're number 5 in wind energy. So we can set, this is also where the federal government comes in. You know, as long as we're subsidizing coal and oil and gas, we're not making any progress. And the problem is, if we don't start now, I'm not a real believer in tipping points. We get to a certain point and it just ends. But every step we take now is going to slow this down sooner. The longer we wait, the more expensive, the more difficult, the greater the impacts are going to be. And so the biggest single thing is we have to move towards renewable energy and away from our dependence on oil and coal and gas. And that's going to be a huge challenge because we can't do that overnight. But that's where we have to go. There's no question.
So why is it so difficult to switch to renewable energies? Why is coal and these sort of antiquated energy source are so dominant in this society? I mean, what is it about it that we rely on it so much?
Well, I think it was easy for a long time. The oil companies are some of the biggest businesses in the world, and we know what they've been doing over the years. They knew about climate change. They misled people. They discredited scientists. But that's what drives the country. You know, oil industry and automobiles, huge part of our economy. So to turn that around has been really difficult. We're getting more efficient solar panels. More and more people are putting them in. We're putting in just the beginning of offshore wind farms, which the federal government hasn't been very helpful in. Europe has something like 5,000 offshore wind turbines. We have three windmills.
Oh my.
And part of it has just been environmental issues and you know.
What about the windmills in Palm Springs?
No, those are inland ones, and those are great.
I see.
Those have been a little easier, but once you get out in the ocean, the people along the coast say, well, I don't want to look at it. Well, it's going to affect the birds. So we've gotten to this point where we don't know how to compromise. And I think we even have environmentalists fighting environmentalists. You know, want to go out in the desert, put in a solar farm. Well, there's a turtle out there that we need to be careful of. Well, we have to deal with that, and we have to sort of simplify our permitting process. So if a company wants to build offshore wind farms, the federal government has to get in line with that. If we want to build a solar farm, you know, whatever the obstacles are, we've got to get over those. And right now, we're still subsidizing coal and oil, which is ridiculous. I mean, Mobil Exxon is the biggest oil company in the world, and they're still getting federal subsidies. So we really have to figure out, this is, I mean, we keep calling it an existential problem. Our existence depends on this. And there's a couple of sites online where you can go and look at your own sort of personal impact. And it turns out one of these, you put in sort of what you eat, your travel, your sort of household energy use, and stuff you buy. And it turns out it puts it into a definition of how many Earths would it take if everybody lived your lifestyle, all 8 billion people. And it turns out for the US as a whole, if everybody lived our lifestyle, it would take 5 Earths. And we don't have 5 Earths, just in terms of energy and water and food and soil and minerals. So we're on this sort of collision course. And I think most people, I don't know what it is. They don't think about the future, their children, their grandchildren. Say, well, I don't believe it, or I'm going to still drive my big car, whatever it is. So it's a tough thing to turn around, just because we've gotten so far into this sort of, you know, consumption lifestyle that nobody wants to give up anything. But we don't have to give up electricity. We can build more solar, more wind farms, but we've got to start getting rid of our dependence on fossil fuel energy, because every time we burn more greenhouse gases, we're raising the temperature. You know, the first thing that President did was try to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord, which is how to get this under control. But California can set an example, and the other states and other countries, I think, will listen to that.
All right. Well, let's hope so, because we do have a lot of work ahead of us.
We do.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking with us.
Oh, good. Thank you for having me.
It's been enlightening and scary at once.
Scary at once. Vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Good to talk to you.
You as well.
Okay. Bye-bye.